You live your life thinking you are in control of your choices, your thoughts, your beliefs. But what if I told you that your mind, right now, is a chessboard for someone else's game? That every emotion you feel, every decision you make, might be gently nudged by invisible hands. This is not a conspiracy. This is psychology, the kind that does not heal, but hijacks. Welcome to the realm of dark psychology, where silence is the greatest weapon, and words are never just words. In this world, manipulation is not loud, not obvious, not brutal. It is elegant, strategic, almost invisible. Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling confused, doubting yourself, wondering if you were too sensitive or just overthinking? That right there is the fog of psychological manipulation, a fog deliberately designed to keep you from seeing what is being done to you. In this video, you will explore how manipulators use your own thoughts, your empathy, your need for connection against you. You will learn how the psychology of manipulation has evolved from blunt control to silent influence, from cages made of iron to cages made of trust. We are not just talking about obvious manipulators. This is not about shouting matches or control freaks. This is about the ones who whisper, who smile while stealing your agency, who praise you while pruning your independence. This is about the emotional engineer, the Machiavellian mind, the digital puppeteer, the lover who leaves you unsure of reality. They do not take control. You give it to them, slowly, unknowingly, until you cannot recognize your own inner voice anymore. And what is most chilling is this. The best manipulators never raise suspicion. They use philosophy. They quote psychology facts. They pretend to care about mental health and human behavior. But what they truly want is not your well-being. What they want is your mind, your compliance, your silence. In this journey, we will break down the core techniques of manipulation, expose the subtle tactics used in relationships, media, even friendships, and dig deep into the psychology of manipulators who have mastered the art of emotional sleight of hand. But there is one thing I will not reveal until the end. One universal pattern that nearly all manipulators, regardless of background or motive, use without fail. You may think you already know it. You do not. And once you do, you will never see the world the same again. So ask yourself, really ask, if someone wanted to control your mind, how would you even know? Comment below if you have ever second-guessed your own thoughts after someone made you feel like you were overreacting. You are not alone, and this video might finally explain why. You will not see them coming. That is the first truth about manipulation. While your eyes search for warning signs, your brain listens to the wrong frequency, because in the world of dark psychology, the loudest manipulations are rarely the most dangerous. It is the soft ones, the ones that feel like understanding, like connection, like care, that truly control your mind. Silent manipulators are not monsters in shadows. They are often people you know, people you trust. They do not demand obedience. They guide it. They do not argue. They ask subtle questions. They do not shout orders. They suggest, they imply. They seed thoughts into your head until you believe those thoughts were your own. This is not magic. This is psychology. In a study of behavioral control conducted by Dr. Daniel Wegner in the late 1990s, he introduced the idea of the illusion of conscious will. He suggested that many of the decisions we think we make consciously are actually constructed by unconscious cues we are not even aware of. Manipulators understand this intuitively. They build these cues into their tone, their timing, their gestures, their language. A skilled manipulator rarely tells you what to do. Instead, they make you feel like you wanted to do it all along. That is the core of psychological manipulation, not forcing you to obey, but shaping your reality so obedience feels like freedom. Think of the coworker who constantly praises you but always seems to get you to take on their extra tasks. Think of the partner who says, "You're free to go out if you want," in a tone that makes you feel guilty for having your own life. Think of the friend who keeps reminding you how much they've sacrificed for you, until you begin sacrificing your own boundaries in return. These are not obvious power plays. These are covert tactics designed to make you the architect of your own prison. But why does it work? Because of how your brain responds to social harmony and approval. The human brain is wired for connection. Evolution did not favor the independent, but the bonded. And when those bonds are threatened, when someone we care about withdraws affection or subtly disapproves, we unconsciously adjust our behavior to restore that connection. This is what psychologists call compliance without pressure. It feels like you are choosing, but you are choosing from a menu someone else prepared. Now here is the paradox question. If you are being manipulated in a way that feels good, kind, even affirming, would you even want to stop it? And this is where machiavellianism enters the stage. The term, drawn from Niccolò Machiavelli's ruthless political philosophy, describes personalities who manipulate, not through aggression, but through strategic charm, calculated empathy, and deep understanding of human nature. They know what you want to hear, they know what you fear, and they know exactly how to frame a lie so it feels like truth. These people are not always malicious. Some simply view life as a game of advantage. They might be your boss, your mentor, your partner. They might even believe they are helping you, but behind every soft request, every well-timed smile, is a calculated effort to direct your behavior for their benefit. And here's the most unsettling part. They often succeed because they understand the psychology of manipulation better than most therapists. They know your mind better than you do. So how many of your beliefs are truly yours, and how many were softly placed into you while you smiled and nodded? No one walks into a trap willingly, but many walk into love, into trust, into comfort, and never notice the teeth until it is too late. This is how psychological manipulation works, not by attacking your defenses, but by discovering where they never existed. To understand how people control your mind, you must first understand what makes it open to control, and that means facing something uncomfortable, your own vulnerability. Vulnerability is not weakness. In fact, it is a fundamental part of what makes us human. It is your need to be seen, heard, understood. Your yearning for intimacy, connection, significance. It is why praise feels good, why rejection hurts so deeply, why silence from someone you love can echo louder than any insult. And manipulators, especially those fluent in dark psychology, know exactly how to read those needs even when you do not. They observe what you avoid, what you crave. They notice how your voice changes when you talk about your past. They pay attention to where you place your worth, where you seek validation. And once they know that, they do not need force. They only need presence, attention, a little affection at the right time, a few words that align with your hidden ache. This is not about cruelty. It is about influence and persuasion rooted in emotional data. Human behavior is full of patterns, and a skilled manipulator knows how to trace those patterns back to the origin. Your fears. One of the most exploited psychological patterns is attachment anxiety. According to psychologist John Bowlby, our early relationships shape how we respond to closeness and distance. If you experienced inconsistency, love that appeared, then vanished, you may develop an anxious attachment style. That means you feel hyper-aware of disconnection. You overanalyze silence. You need reassurance, even when it is not reasonable. And manipulators love this, because to them your anxiety is a lever, a way to create instability, then offer themselves as the only stabilizer. They trigger your panic, then become your peace. That is the hook. You begin to associate the same person who harms you with the very comfort you seek to escape the harm. It sounds illogical, but it is psychologically sound. This is known as trauma bonding. Here is the paradox. The more someone hurts you, then comforts you, the deeper your bond becomes. Have you ever noticed how some of the most toxic relationships also feel the most intense? That is not passion. That is programming. Mental manipulation framed as emotional intensity. What makes this even more dangerous is that the manipulated often blame themselves. They say, maybe I am too sensitive, or I know they are just going through something. This self-doubt is not random. It is engineered. It is fed to you in small doses. Subtle shaming, emotional invalidation, shifting blame, until your compass spins and you cannot tell which direction safety lies. This is where emotional manipulation blends into psychological abuse, and it often thrives in silence. The world does not teach you to protect your emotional boundaries. It teaches you to be kind, to give second chances, to see the best in people, and those are beautiful traits, until someone uses them to control your mind. So ask yourself, what part of you longs to be chosen, even if it means tolerating pain? Because that is the door the manipulator walks through. And until you lock that door, not with fear, but with awareness, you will always be vulnerable to the one who whispers the right words at the wrong time. You remember it clearly. You know what they said, how they looked, how it made you feel. But when you bring it up, they deny it. Not just once, but persistently. They say, that never happened, or you're imagining things, or worse, why do you always twist things? Soon you begin to doubt yourself, not just the memory, not just the words, but your ability to trust your own mind. That is gaslighting. Named after the 1944 film Gaslight, this manipulation technique has become one of the most dangerous forms of psychological warfare in modern relationships. It is not just lying, it is a campaign against your perception, a gradual erosion of your mental health until you become dependent on someone else for reality. Gaslighting is the slow death of certainty. A manipulator who uses gaslighting does not need to raise their voice. They are not focused on proving their point. They are focused on making you question yours. Over time, their goal is not to win an argument. Their goal is to control your mind so deeply that you stop arguing at all. Psychologist Dr. Robin Stern describes gaslighting as emotional abuse where the abuser makes the victim doubt their perception, memory, or sanity. And this is not accidental, it is strategic, it is surgical. It begins with small inconsistencies, "That's not what I meant," or "You're too emotional," and grows into full-scale rewriting of your reality. At its core, gaslighting exploits your psychological vulnerability. Most people want to be reasonable. They want to see both sides. They want to avoid conflict. Manipulators use this against you. The more empathy you have, the easier it becomes to twist your thoughts around their version of truth. And when you start needing their reassurance to know what is real, you are no longer thinking for yourself. Here is a question you must ask. If someone can rewrite your memory, do they own your mind? In repeated cases of gaslighting, victims report a collapse of self-confidence, confusion, anxiety, and even symptoms of depression. Some begin to isolate, no longer trusting friends or family who see things differently. The manipulator becomes their only trusted narrator. This is not coincidence. This is behavior control through emotional engineering. It gets worse. Over time, you may begin to anticipate the gaslighting before it happens. You start editing your own thoughts before expressing them. You replay conversations in your head, checking yourself. You withhold opinions, afraid of the backlash. This is self-gaslighting, and it is one of the most dangerous psychological prisons a person can live in. This is not just emotional manipulation. It is psychological abuse masked as love, or concern, or reason. And it is more common than you think. Gaslighting does not only occur in relationships. It happens in workplaces, politics, media. It happens when your lived experience is invalidated by authority, or when the truth is slowly replaced with what is more convenient for someone else's power. It is embedded in systems that say it is not that bad when it absolutely is. The damage is not just emotional, it is existential. Because once you can no longer trust your own perception, your identity begins to blur. And if you do not know what you believe, what you saw, what you felt, who are you? Psychology of manipulation does not always scream. Sometimes it whispers. And gaslighting is the quietest, cruelest whisper of them all. So here is the paradox. If someone tells you that you are crazy, and they do it kindly, gently, lovingly, how long before you believe it? It starts with something small, a favor, a task, a question that seems too minor to matter. You agree. Why not? It feels harmless, maybe even polite. But what you do not notice is that in saying yes to that small thing, you just opened the door. And once it is open, manipulation walks right in. This is known in psychology as the foot-in-the-door technique, a powerful tactic rooted in behavioral science. The concept is simple, but its implications are vast. If someone can get you to agree to a small request, you are significantly more likely to agree to a larger one later. And the more you say yes, the harder it becomes to say no. In 1966, psychologists Jonathan Friedman and Scott Fraser, conducted a landmark study. They asked homeowners to place a small, discreet sign in their window supporting safe driving. Most agreed. A few weeks later, those same homeowners were asked to install a massive, unattractive billboard on their lawn with the same message. The result? A significantly higher number of those who agreed to the small request accepted the large one, compared to those who were only asked about the billboard. What started as a tiny yes turned into a surrendered boundary. This is the psychology of progressive control. It works because our minds value consistency. Once we take a stand, even a small one, we tend to stay aligned with it. Saying no feels like a contradiction to who we now believe we are, so we keep going. Not because we want to, but because we already started. And this is exactly what manipulators exploit. They do not ask for everything at once. That would be too obvious. Instead, they begin with gestures that feel innocent. They may ask for a small secret, a tiny concession, a little compromise. Just this once, just for now, just to prove something. And you say yes, not realizing that your answer has momentum. Soon, they are asking for more time, more effort, more silence, more of you. And here is where dark psychology reveals its subtle brilliance. The trap never feels like a trap. It feels like progression, like deepening trust, like a growing relationship. But by the time you begin to question it, you are already so far in that saying no feels like betrayal, not of them, but of yourself. This technique is everywhere. In narcissistic manipulation, it begins with admiration. You're the only one who understands me. Then comes a request. Can you help me with this? Followed by another. I just need you to keep this between us. Eventually you are isolated from your own clarity, tangled in someone else's needs. In sales, it is the free sample that leads to a pitch. In politics, it is the small policy change that paves the way for sweeping reform. In relationships, it is the first time you tolerate disrespect because it felt like love. The paradox is chilling. The most dangerous traps are the ones you build one polite step at a time. So ask yourself, right now, what have you agreed to lately that felt small, but somehow keeps growing? That yes you gave to keep the peace, to protect the moment, to avoid guilt. What has it cost you? Psychological manipulation does not demand your surrender. It requests your cooperation, bit by bit. And the more you comply, the more invisible the control becomes. The technique works not because people are weak. It works because people are kind, consistent, hopeful, and that is what makes it so hard to detect, because it hides in your best traits. And when you finally realize you want to walk away, you are not just breaking a pattern, you are breaking the identity you built by saying yes. You are a good person. You try to do what is right. You listen. You follow rules. And when someone in a position of power asks you to do something, you usually comply, not out of fear but out of trust. But what if I told you that same trust, that obedience, could be used to make you do things that betray your own values? That the strongest tool of psychological manipulation is not deception, but your willingness to follow someone you believe knows better. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted one of the most disturbing experiments in the history of psychology. Participants believed they were helping with a memory study. They were told to administer electric shocks to another person whenever that person answered a question incorrectly. The shocks increased in intensity with each wrong answer. The person being shocked, of course, was an actor. No real harm was done. But the participants did not know that. What did Milgram find? A staggering 65% of participants continued to deliver shocks up to the highest voltage level, simply because an authoritative figure in a lab coat told them to. Even as they heard screams, even as the person fell silent, they obeyed. Why? Because humans are wired to respect authority. From childhood, we are taught that certain people, parents, teachers, doctors, leaders, know what is best. This makes sense in a healthy society. It keeps order, it builds structure. But it also creates a dangerous vulnerability, the tendency to suspend our own judgment when someone else seems to have the answers. This is not about evil, it is about programming. The psychology of manipulation in these cases does not rely on threats. It relies on confidence, tone, uniform, status, a calm voice saying, "It's okay, just follow through." And you do. Because disobedience does not just feel risky, it feels wrong. Manipulators know this, especially those with narcissistic, authoritarian, or Machiavellian tendencies. They understand that by presenting themselves as certain, as informed, as superior, they do not need to convince you. They only need to look like they know what they are doing. This is how people fall into harmful relationships, into cults, into toxic workplaces, not because they are foolish, but because they are human, and humans by nature look for guidance when faced with uncertainty. But here is the paradox. The more certain someone appears, the less likely we are to question them, even when that certainty begins to feel wrong. In a world full of noise and confusion, we crave clarity. That craving becomes a shortcut, and manipulators offer that shortcut with open arms. This shows up in subtle ways. Your boss assigns a task that compromises your ethics, but frames it as standard procedure. A partner tells you to stay quiet about something uncomfortable because they know how people work. A friend insists that their opinion is fact because they've seen it all. And you find yourself complying, not because you agree, but because questioning them feels like defiance. This is not just social pressure. This is mind control through manufactured authority. And once you follow once, it becomes harder to resist the next time. Dark psychology thrives here, in the space where your trust becomes a leash. So let me ask you something personal. When was the last time you obeyed, not because it felt right, but because someone made you feel like they were right? That is where the manipulation begins, not with force, but with the surrender of your own discernment. And the more obedient you become to outside voices, the quieter your inner voice grows. You care, you feel, you try to see the good in people. When someone is hurting, you want to understand. When someone is struggling, you want to help. This is empathy, one of the most beautiful traits a human being can possess. But in the wrong hands, your empathy is not a bridge, it is a leash. This is where dark psychology becomes most deceptive, when manipulators use your compassion not to connect with you, but to control you. They learn how to pull on your emotions like strings, painting themselves as victims, as misunderstood, as fragile. And you step in, arms open, unaware that you are stepping into a trap. Psychological manipulation does not always look like domination. Sometimes it looks like vulnerability, a tear at the right moment, a story about their painful past, a confession that makes you feel special, trusted, needed. But what happens when that pain becomes a tool? You start excusing their behavior. You rationalize their cruelty. You tell yourself they are just going through a hard time, that they are trying their best. You become their therapist, their savior, their emotional caretaker. And slowly, you stop being yourself. This tactic is especially common in narcissistic manipulation. The narcissist, when cornered, does not always fight. They deflect, they shift blame, they suddenly become the one who is being attacked. Their past becomes their shield, their tears become their defense. And because you are empathic, because you are emotionally intelligent, you feel guilty for setting boundaries, you feel cruel for saying no. You begin to suppress your own needs, your voice, your instincts, all to avoid hurting someone who is in reality hurting you. Here is the paradox. Your deepest strength becomes your greatest weakness. The very thing that makes you kind becomes the thing that makes you vulnerable. This is not just emotional confusion. It is covert manipulation, rooted in the psychological weaponization of guilt and sympathy. In psychological studies of emotional intelligence, researchers have found that empathy can become maladaptive when it overrides self-protection. Dr. Paul Bloom, in his book Against Empathy, argues that unchecked empathy can lead to poor decisions and personal harm. Why? Because it creates emotional bias. It makes you over-identify with someone else's pain, even when they are the source of your own. And manipulators know this. They create a dynamic where you feel responsible for their emotions, where you feel like the villain when you say no, where their distress becomes your problem to solve. And every time you fix something for them, you lose a piece of your autonomy. So let me ask you something, quietly, gently, honestly. How many times have you put someone else's pain above your own peace? How often have you justified toxic behavior because they've been through a lot? This is not about closing your heart. It is about protecting it. Because empathy, without discernment, becomes a door, and manipulators are experts at walking through that door with stories that make you cry, even while they take from you what you cannot afford to lose. They do not always look dangerous. Sometimes they look broken. But the real danger lies in how easily they convince you to put down your sword, your shield, your clarity. Empathy is not supposed to hurt you. It is supposed to connect you. And when it becomes a weapon, it is no longer empathy. It is psychological abuse, dressed in sentiment. You do not have to choose between compassion and boundaries. You can care and still say no. You can feel deeply and still walk away. That is not cruelty. That is wisdom. You meet someone new. The connection feels instant, almost eerie. They laugh when you laugh. They nod before you finish your sentence. They seem to like what you like, think how you think, even hurt in the same ways. It feels like fate, a soulmate, a mirror. But what if it is not a mirror? What if it is a mask? This is the psychology of mirroring, a powerful and often invisible manipulation technique rooted in the natural human desire to feel understood. In healthy relationships, mirroring can build rapport. It helps us bond, align, feel safe. But in dark psychology, mirroring becomes something else entirely. It becomes mimicry, a carefully engineered imitation used to lower your guard and build false intimacy. Manipulators do not just study your interests. They study your emotional rhythm. They watch how you respond, what lights you up, what makes you go quiet. Then they become that reflection, not because it is real, but because it works. This tactic is especially common in Machiavellian and psychopathic personalities, individuals who do not form connections through emotion, but through strategy. Their goal is not closeness, but control of your mind, and the quickest path to control is familiarity. Because familiarity builds trust. When someone mirrors your behavior, your brain relaxes. You subconsciously associate them with safety. This is evolutionary biology at work. In tribal dynamics, similarity often meant survival, but in modern life, this instinct can be exploited. Here is the trap. You begin to trust someone, not because of what they say, but because of how deeply they resemble you. And once that trust is formed, the psychological manipulation begins. You share more, you open up faster, you attach quicker, and in doing so, you give them everything they need. Your fears, your dreams, your wounds, all of it becomes data in the hands of someone who is not reflecting you, but replicating you. This is not empathy, it is emotional hijacking. A study on neuro-linguistic programming shows how mirroring body language, tone and speech patterns can accelerate persuasion and increase likability. While NLP itself remains controversial in academic circles, many agree that these tactics can be used to influence others without their awareness. In the wrong hands, this becomes psychological theater, a game of emotional mimicry designed to bypass your critical thinking. Have you ever met someone who seemed too perfect, who agreed with everything you said, who told you exactly what you wanted to hear before you even realized you wanted to hear it? That is not resonance, that is rehearsed manipulation. And the most dangerous part, it works especially well on emotionally intelligent people, because the more you value connection, the faster you fall for someone who mirrors it back. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Who in your life feels like a reflection of you, but somehow always gets what they want? That is the paradox. They seem like you, but they always win. Because they are not connecting, they are performing. And the performance is designed to create dependency. You begin to rely on their presence, their validation, their emotional echo. Without realizing it, you stop thinking alone. You start feeling with someone else's cues. Human behavior is shaped by rhythm, and manipulators use that rhythm to guide your emotions, like a conductor leads a symphony. But the music is not for your benefit, it is for their control. So how do you break the spell? You start listening not just to what feels good, but to what feels real. You slow down, you test patterns, you ask hard questions, because true connection does not mimic you, it challenges you. Mirroring can be beautiful when it is unconscious and mutual, but when it is strategic, repeated, and one-sided. It is not a sign of closeness. It is a sign of mental manipulation. At first it feels like a dream. The attention is overwhelming, but in the best way. The messages never stop. The compliments feel poetic. The connection feels cosmic. "I've never felt this way before," they say, and part of you believes it, because you have never felt this way either. This is not just affection. It is fireworks. It is fantasy. It is what psychologists call love bombing. And it is not love. It is manipulation. Love bombing is a tactic rooted in psychological manipulation, designed to flood your nervous system with validation, pleasure, and attachment so quickly and so intensely that you lose the ability to think critically. It feels like intimacy, but it is really control of your mind through emotional saturation. You are not falling in love. You are being chemically programmed. Studies in psychology have shown that emotional surges activate the same reward pathways in the brain as addictive substances. When someone showers you with affection, praise, and attention, your brain releases dopamine, oxytocin, even serotonin. These are bonding chemicals. They make you trust. They make you attach. And when the intensity is high enough, they make you dependent. This is not just coincidence. It is strategy. Manipulators, especially narcissists or those with Machiavellian traits, use love bombing as a hook. It is the bait, the sparkle, the illusion. And once you are in, once you believe this connection is special, fated, unrepeatable, they begin to change. The compliments slow down. The texts become inconsistent. The attention fades. You start asking what you did wrong. You start chasing the high that was once given freely. You start molding yourself to be who they adored before, only to realize that version of them may have never existed. What has happened is known as the idealization-devaluation cycle. First, you are idealized, put on a pedestal, told you are perfect, rare, sacred. Then, slowly, you are devalued, criticized subtly, made to feel inadequate, and finally, discarded or strung along, depending on how much control they still want over you. This is not love. It is emotional manipulation dressed in romance. Let me ask you something honest. Have you ever been loved so intensely, so suddenly, only to be left wondering what you did to lose it? That confusion is not random. It is part of the script. Psychological abuse often hides inside charm, and love bombing is the most seductive form of charm there is. It makes you addicted to their approval. It makes you ignore red flags. It makes you believe that the loss of intensity is your fault, when in truth the intensity was a setup. Human behavior is wired to seek attachment. From infancy, we learn to connect through emotional reciprocity, but manipulators use that wiring to create a trap. They overwhelm you, not because they love you, but because they want to skip past your defenses. And once they know they have you, they no longer need to try. Here is the paradox. The people who make you feel most seen in the beginning are often the ones who disappear without explanation. So how can you tell the difference? Healthy love grows slowly, builds stability, respects your boundaries. Love bombing ignores boundaries. It accelerates vulnerability. It pressures commitment. It thrives on intensity over sincerity. And it always wants something in return: your attention, your devotion, your obedience. This is not romance. This is dark psychology at its most seductive. Because once you have been love-bombed, you do not just miss the person, you miss the version of yourself they reflected back to you, the idealized self, the one that felt wanted, special, chosen. But that was never love. That was a mirror. And behind the mirror was control. There is a moment, silent, invisible, when your body freezes. You do not speak. You do not fight. You do not run. You just stay still, heart racing, mind blank. And afterward, you ask yourself, why didn't I say something? This is not weakness. This is psychology. More specifically, it is fear conditioning, a core tool in the manipulator's playbook. You might think manipulation always comes through charm or deceit, but some of the most powerful psychological manipulation happens through fear, not the kind that screams at you, but the kind that whispers, threatens, withdraws, and lingers. Fear has always been a tool of control. From ancient empires to modern relationships, the ability to instill fear without physical violence has shaped human behavior more than we like to admit. Let's look at the science. In the 1960s, psychologist Martin Seligman conducted a series of controversial studies, now known as the foundation of learned helplessness. In one experiment, dogs were subjected to mild shocks, with no means of escape. Later, even when a way out was made available, the dogs did not move. They had been trained, conditioned, to believe that escape was pointless. Now replace the dog with a person. Replace the shock with emotional punishment, stonewalling, guilt, criticism, silent treatment. And the result is the same. You stop trying. You become compliant. You freeze, not out of consent, but out of exhaustion. This is how manipulators gain power, not just by punishing you, but by making you anticipate the punishment. Fear conditioning can take many forms. A raised eyebrow when you speak up, a shift in tone when you disagree, a joke that feels more like a warning. Over time, your brain begins to associate action with consequence, even if the consequence is subtle. And once that connection is made, the manipulator no longer needs to do anything. Your own fear becomes the leash. And that leash tightens every time you choose silence over truth. This is especially common in relationships where emotional manipulation takes root. The fear is not just of rejection, it is the fear of emotional fallout, of escalation, of being misunderstood. And the more you try to keep the peace, the more you lose your voice. Here is the psychological trap. When fear is used often enough, you start censoring yourself, not to avoid conflict, but to avoid existing fully. You become small, predictable, manageable, and to the manipulator, that is ideal. Dark psychology thrives not only on action, but on inaction, on your hesitation, on your silence, on the split-second pause where you consider speaking your truth and decide against it. And here's the paradox. Sometimes the fear does not come from them. It comes from you, from past trauma, from shame, from the fear of losing what little connection remains. And that inner fear is all a manipulator needs to finish the job. They do not need to raise their voice. They only need to let you fear what might happen if they did. So ask yourself, how many times have you stayed quiet? Not because you were wrong, but because you were afraid of what might follow if you were right. That is not peace. That is psychological freezing. And it is not a flaw in you. It is a result of being conditioned over time, with precision, to believe that your truth is too dangerous to speak. Breaking this pattern begins with awareness, with recognizing that fear does not always mean danger. Sometimes, it means you are stepping into your power, and manipulation, no matter how quiet, cannot survive when fear is replaced with clarity. Because once you unfreeze, once you act, once you speak, something shifts. And the manipulator, who once counted on your silence, begins to lose control. You chose your job, you chose your partner, you chose what to say in that conversation, how to act in that moment, and even what to believe about yourself. Or did you? One of the most unsettling truths in dark psychology is this. Many of the choices you think you are making were made for you long before you noticed. Welcome to the illusion of choice, a manipulation tactic so subtle, so elegant, that it hides in plain sight. At its core, the illusion of choice is not about removing your freedom. It is about controlling the frame around it. You still pick between options, but those options are hand-selected, pre-approved, and carefully arranged to lead you in one direction, their direction. This technique is rooted in the psychological concept of choice architecture, a term made popular by behavioral economist Richard Thaler. His research shows that the way options are presented influences the decision itself. When you walk into a store, the items at eye level are not placed randomly. When you answer a question online, the phrasing is not neutral. Even your social media feed is not a mirror of your preferences. It is a curated maze designed to shape what you want. In short, you feel like you are choosing, but you are being led. Manipulators use this in conversations, in relationships, in arguments. They offer you choices that appear to be fair, but both lead back to their control. You might hear something like, "Are you going to calm down now, or keep overreacting?" It sounds like a question, but it is really a trap. Both answers make you look unstable. Or perhaps they say, "I guess you can either support me or be selfish." Again, the illusion of freedom, when in reality, you are boxed in. And even when they say, do whatever you want, it carries a tone, a weight, a tension that signals a consequence. They have already framed the emotional cost of either choice. That is not support. That is manipulation. This is psychological manipulation by design. It plays on your need to feel autonomous, your deep human desire to believe that you are in control, and it rewards you for cooperating within limits you never agreed to in the first place. Even silence can be a false choice. If you say nothing, they win by default. If you speak, you are answering within their terms. Either way, you are not choosing, you are reacting. This tactic becomes especially dangerous in relationships, where patterns of behavior are built over time. You may begin to notice that every conversation, every plan, every decision somehow lands in their favor. You feel like you are contributing, but you are actually complying. And here is where the illusion becomes a trap. The more choices you make inside someone else's structure, the more invested you become in justifying them. This is called cognitive dissonance, a psychological discomfort that happens when your actions and beliefs no longer match. To relieve that tension, you begin to change your beliefs, not because you understand the truth, but because accepting manipulation is harder than believing a lie. So when the realization hits that your autonomy has been hijacked, it feels like betrayal, not just from them, but from yourself. And that leads to the quiet question most people never say aloud. How many of your recent choices felt like freedom, but left you feeling smaller? The paradox is sharp. The more choices you are given, the less you question the structure around those choices, and manipulators thrive in that blind spot. Even when their voice is kind, even when their words are framed as encouragement, there is often an unspoken expectation, an emotional cost for non-compliance. I support your decision either way, they say, but their silence, if you choose wrong, is loud enough to shape your next one. This is not autonomy, it is emotional coercion disguised as neutrality. And the most dangerous part, sometimes you do not realize the illusion until it is already your new reality. You wake up one day, look around and wonder how every decision you made somehow led away from yourself. Real choice does not just require options, it requires awareness of who is offering them, of what is missing, and of how you truly feel about what you are being asked to choose. Because if you never asked for the menu, then you never truly ordered. You like to think of your mind as a fortress, logical, grounded, resistant to deception. But what if that very logic, the shortcuts your brain uses to make sense of the world, is the precise reason you are so easily misled? This is where dark psychology does not just manipulate your emotions, but targets your thinking itself, and the weapons used, not lies, not pressure, but your own cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are mental shortcuts, quick judgments your brain makes to help you process complex information. In survival terms, they are useful. They help you make fast decisions, but in the realm of psychological manipulation, they are weak spots, cracks in the wall that a skilled manipulator can exploit. Let's start with the confirmation bias. You tend to seek out, remember, and believe information that supports what you already think is true. So when a manipulator tells you something that fits your view about them, about yourself, about someone else, you are more likely to believe it, even if it is false. They do not need to convince you of anything new. They just need to echo what you already feel. And what happens when someone disagrees with you? The backfire effect often kicks in. You double down. You resist new evidence, not because you are unreasonable, but because your brain protects your beliefs like precious territory. Another bias often used is the anchoring effect. When you hear a number or a fact first, that information becomes the anchor around which you evaluate all later data. So if a manipulator tells you, "I've done more for you than anyone else," that statement, even if untrue, sets the bar. Everything else you think about them is now measured by that anchor. Then comes the scarcity bias. You are more likely to value something if you believe it is rare or limited. Manipulators will say, "People like me don't come around often," or "You'll never find someone who loves you this way." It creates urgency, it creates fear, it makes you ignore red flags because you think you are about to lose something special. And here is one of the most dangerous biases of all, the familiarity heuristic. The more often you hear something, the more likely you are to believe it is true. So when a manipulator repeats certain phrases, "You're lucky I put up with you," or "You're overthinking everything," those words burrow into your mind, they become familiar, and eventually, they feel real. This is not stupidity, this is human nature. Even psychologists, even philosophers, even experts fall into these traps, because these shortcuts are not flaws, they are part of how the brain processes reality. But manipulators, especially those skilled in Machiavellian tactics, learn to exploit these flaws with precision. They do not need to be smarter than you, they only need to know your patterns and trust that your brain will do the rest. Let me ask you something direct. When was the last time you believed something, not because it was true, but because it felt familiar, or comforting, or matched the version of reality you already preferred? That is how psychological manipulation hides in the assumptions you never question. The paradox is painful. The more intelligent you are, the more confidence you may have in your reasoning, and the more susceptible you become to bias. Because intelligence does not eliminate bias, it just makes it harder to see. So what can you do? You slow down, you question your first thought, you challenge what feels obvious, you ask, who benefits if I believe this? And more importantly, who suffers if I don't? Because a mind unguarded by self-reflection is a playground for influence. And in the war for your perception, truth is not always what is loudest. It is what survives your own defense mechanisms. They tell you it is for your own good. They say they are protecting you, guiding you, keeping you from harm. They speak in the language of virtue, justice, loyalty, love. And you believe them. Because how could someone using the language of morality be doing anything wrong? This is the trap of moral manipulation, one of the most dangerous forms of control in dark psychology, because unlike lies or fear, moral manipulation does not come wrapped in obvious malice. It comes dressed in righteousness. It wears a smile. It wears a halo. But behind the kindness, behind the calm voice and noble words, is the same desire that drives all forms of psychological manipulation, the desire for control. Manipulators who use morality as their weapon do not want you to just obey. They want you to feel like you owe them your obedience, that you are failing, not just them, but goodness itself, if you resist. This is not just a personal dynamic. It plays out on a global scale, across politics, religion, parenting, even activism. People justify cruelty, domination, exclusion, all in the name of what is right. The philosopher Michel Foucault wrote extensively about this, about how power hides behind the guise of morality, of progress, of truth. According to Foucault, those who control the narrative of what is normal, what is good, what is acceptable, they do not need to use violence. The system itself enforces compliance, through shame, through silence. In manipulative relationships, this shows up subtly. Your partner tells you, a real relationship means always supporting each other, no matter what. When you question their actions, a parent says, after everything I've done for you, how could you disappoint me like this? A friend frames their boundaries as universal truths. If you were a decent person, you would understand. And you begin to doubt yourself, not your behavior, but your integrity. Because moral manipulation does not attack what you did, it attacks who you are. It tells you that disagreement equals betrayal, that asserting your needs equals selfishness, that speaking your truth equals disloyalty. Let me ask you this, when was the last time someone made you feel wrong for simply protecting your own peace? This is not an accident. It is a form of emotional manipulation that uses guilt as its currency. The more you care about being good, the easier you are to control. Because people who care deeply about being kind, being fair, being thoughtful, are also the ones most vulnerable to moral coercion. And the paradox is brutal. The more principled you are, the more power someone else can have over you. If they know how to frame your resistance as a moral failure, you begin to question your instincts. You silence your discomfort. You start wondering, am I the problem? When really the problem is that your conscience has been turned against you. In psychology, this is sometimes referred to as superego exploitation, when someone uses your internalized values as tools to bend your will. It is not about truth, it is about control through conscience. And once your moral compass points toward them instead of yourself, you are no longer free. Here is the terrifying twist. The most dangerous manipulators are often convinced of their own goodness. They do not think they are doing harm. They believe they are leading you toward the light. That certainty, untouchable, unshakable, is what makes them so effective. Because when someone truly believes they are right, they do not question the damage they cause. And that, perhaps, is the essence of the good villain, not the one who knows they are deceiving you, but the one who has deceived themselves. You scroll, you click, you watch, you like, you repeat. It feels like you are choosing what to see, what to think, what to consume. But what if your choices were being shaped, every second, by something you cannot see? In this age, psychological manipulation does not just come from people. It comes from systems, from algorithms, from silent codes running in the background of your life, collecting, sorting, predicting, and nudging you toward behaviors that feel natural, but are anything but free. This is digital manipulation, the new frontier of dark psychology, where influence is scaled, optimized, and automated. At the surface, it looks like personalization. Your feed shows you content you like. Your ads are relevant. Your recommendations are smart. But in reality, these systems are not designed to reflect your identity. They are designed to shape it. Social media algorithms are built to maximize engagement, not truth, not well-being, not freedom. They learn what holds your attention, what triggers your emotions, what makes you pause, and then they feed it back to you in loops, so subtle, so perfectly tuned, that you begin to believe that the world you see. But it is not. It is a digital mirror, distorted by profit, politics, and precision. This is not speculation, it is proven. In a study published in the journal Nature, researchers demonstrated that small changes in the way content is presented on platforms like Facebook can influence voting behavior, even without users realizing it. Another study from the American Psychological Association found that algorithms can amplify misinformation faster than accurate information because lies, when framed emotionally, are more clickable. So your beliefs, your mood, your worldview can be slowly, invisibly altered by machines that know you better than you know yourself. And here is the most unnerving part. It does not feel like manipulation. It feels like relevance. Because the manipulation is happening in the timing, in the order, in the repetition. You are not being told what to think. You are simply being shown what you already agree with over and over until you forget that disagreement even exists. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you changed your mind about something, not because you were persuaded, but because you realized you had only been seeing one version of the story? That is how mind control works in the modern age. Not through censorship, but through curation, not by silencing voices, but by amplifying the ones that keep you compliant, entertained, divided. Manipulators no longer need to be individuals. They can be algorithms, designed by corporations or governments or marketers, trained to predict your next move, to trigger your next feeling, to pull you deeper into a digital reality where your freedom is an illusion of convenience. And the paradox is devastating. The more tailored your digital world becomes, the less free you actually are. Because freedom requires friction, growth requires exposure, and algorithms are allergic to discomfort. They keep you scrolling in silence, thinking you are exploring, when really you are circling the same psychological loop designed to keep you still. This is not just a tech issue, it is a human behavior issue, a mental health issue, a philosophical issue. Because when your attention is shaped by forces you do not understand, the self that emerges is no longer truly yours. And the more you outsource your curiosity to code, the more your mind becomes property, not of people but of programs. So next time you scroll, pause and ask, who decided this is what I should see? Because the answer to that question might reveal just how much of your mind is no longer your own. You want answers. You want clarity. You want to know what is right, what is wrong, what to do, and who to trust. Because uncertainty, it feels like chaos. It rattles the brain, stirs anxiety, keeps you up at night. Certainty, on the other hand, soothes you. It feels like safety. And that is exactly why it is one of the most seductive tools in psychological manipulation. In the messy unpredictability of modern life, manipulators know you crave direction, so they give it to you. They do not ask you to explore ideas. They hand you conclusions. They speak in absolutes. They use phrases like always, never, everyone knows, and trust me. And because those words sound so clear, so stable, so confident, you believe them, without realizing that you are no longer thinking, you are just following. Dark psychology thrives in this space, not by overwhelming you with confusion, but by offering you relief from it, a relief that comes with a price. When someone gives you certainty, they also take something from you. They take your doubt, your questioning, your ability to weigh possibilities and sit with discomfort. And in return, they offer you peace, not real peace, artificial peace, conditional peace, the kind that only lasts as long as you obey their version of reality. This is not just about conversations. This is about identity. The more someone defines the truth for you, the more you start shaping yourself around it. In a series of psychological studies, researchers found that individuals experiencing high levels of uncertainty were significantly more susceptible to persuasion, especially by figures who appeared confident and decisive. Why? Because uncertainty creates a sense of threat, and certainty reduces that threat. Manipulators know this, especially Machiavellian personalities, cult leaders, toxic partners, political extremists. They know how to turn the fog of life into fear, then walk in like the light. They speak in rules, in doctrines, in binaries. This is good, that is bad, you are with me, or you are against me. And as soon as you accept that structure, your world becomes smaller, but it also becomes simpler, and simplicity is seductive. Let me ask you, when was the last time you agreed with someone, not because you fully believed them, but because it just felt easier than questioning it? That is the paradox. Certainty feels like strength, but it often signals surrender. Surrender of your flexibility, your curiosity, your freedom to explore multiple perspectives without needing one to be final. Manipulators do not need to have the truth. They just need to sound like they do. And the scariest part, you do not realize you have been manipulated until you try to disagree and feel the weight of guilt, fear, or rejection pushing you back into silence. This is how emotional manipulation uses certainty as a leash, not just to make you think something, but to stop you from thinking anything else. And this shows up everywhere, in the partner who says, "You always do this," in the boss who says, "That's not how the real world works," in the influencer who says, "If you don't think this way, you're part of the problem." These statements are not insights, they are fences. Certainty gives you comfort, but sometimes that comfort costs your capacity to think. So what is the solution? You embrace the discomfort, you welcome doubt. You become someone who is strong enough to say, "I don't know," and brave enough to say, "Let me think about it." Because the moment you stop needing certainty is the moment manipulators lose their power over you. And the truth is this: real wisdom rarely speaks in absolutes. It whispers through uncertainty. It invites you to sit with complexity. It teaches you that not knowing is not weakness, it is strength. You have seen the tools, the tactics, the traps. You have walked through the fog of flattery, the silence of fear, the sweet poison of certainty. So the question becomes, what can you do about it? How do you defend your mind, not just from others, but from the quiet ways you abandon your own clarity? This is where awareness becomes armor, and where psychological manipulation begins to lose its grip. The first truth you must accept is that you are not immune. Intelligence does not protect you. Wisdom does not exempt you. In fact, the more emotionally attuned you are, the more vulnerable you may be, because manipulators are not searching for the ignorant. They are searching for the open-hearted, the self-reflective, the ones who feel deeply, think deeply, care deeply. And that is not weakness. That is strength in need of structure. So what does defense look like? It begins with metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking. When you find yourself reacting strongly, feeling ashamed, guilty, afraid, overobligated, pause. Ask yourself, whose voice is this? Whose expectation am I meeting right now? If it is not yours, if it feels like a borrowed fear or a planted guilt, that is your first clue. Then comes boundary clarity. Manipulators thrive where your boundaries are vague. They test you not with big violations, but with small ones. A subtle insult, a small request, a delayed apology. If you do not respond, they escalate. So learn to recognize those early shifts. Learn to say, that doesn't work for me, without apology. Learn to say no, not to hurt someone, but to protect something, yourself. Build emotional differentiation. Just because someone is upset does not mean you did something wrong. Just because someone needs you does not mean you owe them access. Just because someone cries does not mean they are honest. These truths are difficult, but necessary. Your emotional intelligence must include yourself. You must be able to ask, what do I feel right now, and is it even mine? This leads to perhaps the most difficult form of defense, slowing down. Manipulators often create urgency. They pressure you into fast decisions. Emotional ones, they rely on your discomfort with silence, your fear of letting people down, your reflex to fix and please. But when you slow down, they lose control of the rhythm. They lose control of you. So build a habit of delay. Take space. Breathe. Say, I'll think about it. Watch how quickly their tone shifts when you no longer comply in real time. Another layer of protection is truth anchoring, the practice of documenting reality. When you are being gaslighted, manipulated, confused, write things down. Dates, words, events, facts. Your memory is a target. Keep it grounded. Keep it outside their reach. And perhaps most importantly, develop your philosophical center. Know what you believe, not just about people, but about power, freedom, connection, truth. Manipulation does not begin with force. It begins with confusion. The more clearly you see the world and yourself, the harder it is for anyone to blur the lines. Let me ask you this. Who are you when no one is telling you what to feel? That is your baseline. That is where defense becomes more than resistance. It becomes sovereignty. Because true defense is not about walls. It is about discernment, about knowing who to let in and who to keep out. Not from fear, but from clarity. And clarity, once claimed, is very hard to take back. So if you want to reclaim your mind, do not start with confrontation. Start with noticing, with naming, with pausing. Because most manipulation tactics rely on you not noticing the moment they begin. But once you do, once you say, even quietly, I see what you are doing, the game changes. And suddenly, it is not your mind they are playing with anymore. From the very first moment, someone told you how to feel, how to act, how to love. You began learning the subtle language of surrender. And across this journey through dark psychology, you have seen how manipulation wears many faces: kindness, certainty, fear, charm, guilt, silence. But beneath every mask, every tactic, every tool, there is one pattern, one hidden design. It is not deception. It is not dominance. It is dependence. This is the universal law of psychological manipulation, the unspoken truth manipulators rely on, without fail. Every strategy, every word, every choice is built to create one thing: your psychological and emotional reliance on them. They do not just want access to your mind. They want to make themselves essential to it. Because once someone becomes your source of validation, of stability, of truth, of peace, you will tolerate almost anything to keep them close, and they know this. This is the existential trap. You stop questioning, not because you are fooled, but because you are afraid of losing the person or the system you now depend on. That is why manipulators love bomb first, why they offer certainty, why they mirror you, why they slowly rewrite reality. They do not want to control you through power alone. They want to become something you cannot afford to lose. And the deeper this dependence grows, the harder it becomes to see. You justify it. You romanticize it. You say, they're not perfect, but they're mine. Or, they just care too much. Or, maybe I'm the problem. But the deeper truth is this: no one who truly cares about you will make their love, their acceptance, their presence conditional on your compliance. Dependency is not connection, it is captivity. Let me ask you something very personal. Who in your life do you feel you cannot disappoint without losing yourself? That is the point where influence becomes control, where love becomes leverage, where freedom becomes a memory. Philosophers have long warned of this. The Stoics spoke of inner freedom as the only freedom that matters. Viktor Frankl, in The Darkest of Conditions, wrote that the last human freedom is the ability to choose one's attitude, one's inner response, and that freedom begins to vanish the moment you hand someone else the keys to your worth. So the final paradox is this: the only real protection against manipulation is inner sufficiency. When you no longer rely on someone else to feel seen, safe, loved, or whole, you become unmanipulable. They can still try. They can still talk. They can still twist. But there is nothing to grab onto, because you no longer seek outside what you have built inside. That is why awareness is not the end goal of this video. Freedom is. And freedom, real freedom, begins with asking one terrifying, liberating question. What if the only person I truly needed was already me?